Good morning, my friends. This is the Fat Man GM. We are here revisiting Twilight 2000, or Game Designers Workshop, World War III RPG game system. This particular installment is called the Armies of the Night, set in and around New York City. Now, originally, when I read this, and I read this numerous times, and this is actually one of the modules that I converted slightly. I used some information out of this for another game because it dealt with New York quite a bit. The thing that really strikes me is when I read this thing is just how much it reminds me of Escape from New York. I'm just saying, the movie Escape from New York, if you've never watched the movie, you really should. If you're going to play, if you ever get a chance to play this as a module, whether you play this as part of Twilight 2000 or as by itself, you want to play some version of Escape from New York, here's your go-to right here. And there's even a few questionable nods in there, right? So we'll talk. So it didn't sound too bad at first. Milgov wanted to reestablish what the orders were called a presence on Manhattan. Deal with criminal elements, they said, register salvage operations, taxes in kind, organize a census. It all sound peaceful enough. We're just supposed to go in and scout out the land, find a base of operations, and nearly get things ready for Uncle Sugar. Come back to the Big Apple big time. Piece of cake, right? Then I got to the bottom of the orders, and I saw there was one or two things that the brass wanted us to find while we were in the neighborhood. A few tons of gold bars and some trace of the last 8 expeditions. You know, that might be a red flag. If you get your marching orders and it talks about, oh, while you're there, keep an eye out for the last 8 organs, 8 groups we sent there to accomplish this thing, you might be in for a lot rougher time than what they're telling you. Now, why would the brass not tell you the truth, right? So we talk about the opening introduction, GM notes, conducting the adventures, character backgrounds. In this particular one, there's specific characters a member of the U.S. Army, 5th Division, recent return to the United States. Like I said, could be any number of means and ways that they got here, and how they got here doesn't really overly matter. One of the things to remember that Manhattan, specifically New York, but Manhattan specifically is an island for the lion's share, although that's a misnomer because it's actually more like a peninsula if you think about it, because it's not totally cut off. The northern end is landlocked, so you could get through by land, but it's much tougher. So the odds are you're going to get on a boat, and most of the boats in and around New York are run by the harbor rats, which are various little organizations and semi-militias and neo-punk groups, and they're not. Most of them are not to be trusted. There's not going to be too many old geezers with a skiff looking to make a buck just to help you across the river. No, these people are going to cut your throat at the first chance and take your stuff. Especially if they sense any chance of any opportunity that you might slip up and give them that chance. So it says in the new order, player characters are members of advance party sent to New York City to gather information. The military government to reassert control over the city. Milgov is particularly interested in 3 basic categories of information: a census, which is absurd. There's just no way to get a census. You don't have that kind of resources. Salvage, with registration, government can begin collecting taxes from the inhabitants. Taxation being an alt sign of proof of government control. That's right, the government's in control because you're paying them. That's how you know the government's in control. They're taxing you. Milgov can use a secure position in anything, treasures such as salvage a computer, telecommunications gear, copper tubing, refined steel, chemicals, heavy machinery, ball bearings, telephone wires, diesel and gasoline engines, auto and truck parts, wealth of other flotsam and dead of civilization. That's something to take into account when you're talking about a post-apocalyptic scenario. It doesn't matter if it's post-apocalyptic, World War III, or a zombie the apocalypse kind of thing. The fact of the matter is, any highly urbanized area, heavily industrialized area, is going to be a salvager's market of desired stuff. Items the government of the worlds have fallen apart, the industries have stopped. You can't you can't go and get brand new made tires from a tire factory no more. All you're going to get is whatever was left. Whatever's in the warehouse and whatever's on the vehicles. But there's such a huge volume of them available, you should be able to supply your basic needs for your reconstruction effort or just your own survival, at least until past you're dead. We could live quite well off of salvage if everything's not totally burned to the ground or eradicated, irradiated, whatever. Getting there is part of the problem. Setting up shop, taking over, characters' orders. Says when their characters told when they set out, they can be arranged on the bands that call itself the Harbor Rats. People willing to cut the characters any point in New Jersey, across the river to any deserted point on the coast of Manhattan. Deserted point is important. The Harbor Rats have few friends and approach the settled area in daylight will draw fire from the shore. Yeah, i.e. they're pirates. Straight up. They're thugs. They're waterborne gangbangers. The alternative for characters can cross the Hudson from Fort Lee, New Jersey by way of the George Washington Bridge. Relatively safe, but puts them on the far end of the island, over 10 miles from where they want to be. Then they find a place to operate as their headquarters. Where they do depend on their plan on where the Harbor Rats drop them. They need to meet people, ask questions, pick up rumors, poke around. Process, they will be drawn into politics and intrigues. So this is one of those campaigns where you get in and you have a very broad set of orders to try to follow through on. And the truth is, most of the adventure is going to be about establishing yourself as a presence in a very convoluted chunk of property with a lot of people wanting to be the head honcho. So that makes it for an interesting take. And this is one of the reasons I thought of the Escape from New York scenario right off the bat, because they even have the Duke of New York is one of those two. The mayor of New York is the largest would-be guy in charge, and then there's his rival, the Duke of New York. So you make of that what you want. Characters' orders. Characters can begin salvage operations, particularly make friendly contact with characters at Quicksand or over Rhonda, but okay, so the group themselves are not really salvaging. That's what they're trying to do, is connect with other people who do this and find a way to get a piece of the action, and ideally for Uncle Sam, but more importantly, maybe that piece of the action will give them the resources and material to further the goals that they're here to do. It's like the census. It says it right out. This is the most hopeless of their tasks. Most of the characters living, and there's some 120,000 people still living in Greater Manhattan, don't really want to be counted. They have their reasons, because whenever somebody comes up and wants to know who they are and how many they happen to have in their household, the odds are it's not going to be good. We either want you to work for us, we want to turn you into slaves, we want you to give us money. They just don't, they're not going to do it. Register salvage operations, earlier expeditions. There's no mystery here. Well, there are very few specific clues as to what happened. Manhattan is a violent and dangerous place. The characters who enter the city with misplaced sense of superiority or invulnerability are going to end up with a distinct sense of being dead. Those who enter cautiously without throwing their weight around may survive. Earlier military expeditions went in saying greetings for the government. Some were wiped out, others gave up and stopped reported in. Characters may encounter members of earlier missions, usually as members of marauder groups or as militias in the play of self-defense cooperatives. And finding the goal. So far as the characters are concerned, finding the goal is the top priority. Full story of what happened to the gold will be given below with the section title, Whatever Happened to All That Gold. Most of the gold is at the bottom of Central Park Reservoir. Clues pointing in that direction are conversations with James Kellogg, a madman who arranged the hijacking and helped hide the gold. Trucks from the 78th MP Company seen in Central Park. Rusting outlines of 3 Army trucks visible by day in the water's south part of the reservoir. Close investigation revealed these belong to the 78th MP Company, as well as it may be difficult to see during the winter, however. The characters will be able to find people among the mayor's slaves who have seen them and will be able to describe them. And D, the realization that Nathan Snyder is a deserter and the real power behind the mayor. Blah, blah. And whatever happened to all that gold. So theory, this was the gold that was in the National Gold Reserve in New York City, and one of the early expeditions managed to crate most of it up, get it on board some trucks, and then had a fairly heavy convoy support. Were working their way out of the city, but they come under attack constantly. They were eventually whittled down to the point where it was obvious they were not going to exit the city with their load intact, and so the guy in charge conceived of an idea, and more of it had to do with him keeping the gold and becoming the next king of New York than it had to do with getting the gold to the U.S. government and military. So he dumped it and made some people disappear. Good to know, right? So we get a map of the area, city background, Manhattan, people Manhattan. This Manhattan is a Hobbit island. It's inhabited by the year 2000 by fewer than 120,000 survivors. Food is the greatest problem on the island, and that's true. So typical of, once again, Escape from New York. They've taken every park has been turned into a farm. They've actually, some organized groups have taken to clearing out rubble from what where buildings used to be to create more agricultural land. And a lot of people find themselves being forced to work the farms for the various people in control. Studying its environment, nuclear strikes. Nuclear strikes in 87 did direct damage only to portions of Staten Island. Since New Jersey airstrikes were airbursts, fallout was less severe than it could have been. Since then, what fallout there was washed away or decayed to safe levels. No radioactive areas remaining in Manhattan. The only radiation in the entire area, in fact, is the steel skeletons of buildings and bridges in the ruins of Staten Island, within a few miles of the blast centers. Damage to Manhattan from the New Jersey nuclear strikes was slight. Some glass was shattered, particularly near the ground level floors. The blast was intensified by reflection from the pavement, particularly near the southern tip of Manhattan. The aftermath. Resources of local governments were immediately overwhelmed by the conditions that followed nuclear strikes. Fuel was in short supply. All the stocks were confiscated, so heat, electricity, transportation could continue. Medical facilities were hopelessly inadequate. That, and coupled with the sudden desire of millions of people to go elsewhere, the result in rapidly escalating civil disorder. Each one of the city's hundreds of diverse ethnic and cultural groups thought it was being cheated, so when some other group could get more of its fair share, there were riots, lynchings, mass shootings, and arson. The U.S. First Army proclaimed martial law in New York on December 4th and consented the President under proclamation of 42nd Infantry Division's 1st Brigade, New York National Guard, along with the units of the 43rd Military Police Brigade, took over the government of the New York metropolitan area with instructions to keep order and oversee the relocation of the city's population. Thousands of people of Russian and Eastern European backgrounds, as well as French, Greeks, Italians, who were perceived as having betrayed NATO and Europe, plus Chinese and other Orientals because they were different, were slaughtered in citywide massacres, which only provoked reprisals. Food riots began as stockpiles of food dwindled in late December. Whole armies of crazed people would invade nearby neighborhoods, following rumors that secret stockpiles of food, water, and fuel. The resulting slaughter left tens of thousands dead and dying in the streets, while extreme measures brought back a semblance of order in the city. In 97 warned that late 98 conditions continued to deteriorate across the United States, blah, blah, blah. So you can see things went south and kept going south. Life in the big city. Buildings, salvage. Buildings present a double challenge from the armies in the night. First, only a fraction of them have been completely explored by New York's survivors. Without electricity, none of the city's elevators work, and it's a hardy soul indeed who will trudge up 40 or 50 floors in the dark in hopes of finding something valuable enough to bring down. Large numbers of the city's rovers do just that, searching former apartment houses and city high-rises for undiscovered catches of canned food, medicines, or other useful salvage. Higher up, many buildings are relatively untouched by looters, and many harbor what amounts to incredible wealth in post-nuclear New York. Buildings also present players a kind of environmental jungle, a canopy. place where predators from cougars to leopards escape from the zoo, to isolated humans driven mad by loneliness, hunger, and grief, stalk pigeons, rats, and one another in a never-ending battle for survival. Something to be considered. I thought about that once or twice. One of the ways that you would have to, if you had a 84 building that potentially at one time, officed or housed 10 to 50,000 people, how would you conquer this sort of thing? I'm going to go room to room, house, apartment to apartment. Well, it'd take an awful long time. And like climbing a very large mountain, like Mount Everest, perhaps, you might need to establish base camps and to make, do this in gradual increments, and potentially game wise you could spend months playing this particular scenario where you're just trying to explore and salvage a single building. I mean, you honestly could. That's just how big cities really are. Finding salvage, animal life, the rats, the cockroaches, the pigeons. Always nice to know, especially in New York, because they all have their own mythology and, always. And it says here rats are probably one of the largest sources of meat in the city now, which is understandable. Cockroaches can eat anything people eat and therefore compete with humans for food. They love their warm, moist places and makes them carriers of filth that contaminate human food sources. There are no diseases specifically linked to cockroaches as characters, but they're nasty little buggers. The roaches are an important source of food, as edible as any other arthropod. They are much smaller than lobsters, but far, far more numerous and considerably easier to trap. Finicky eaters among Twilight 2000 player characters should remember that roaches fried in oil and garlic have long been considered by some to be good for the digestion. Pigeons are omnipresent scavengers. Pigeon roosts such as these were frequently the lair of larger carnivores as well, since they offer a ready source of virtually inexhaustible game. Feral dog packs that survive still. You have dogs everywhere. Zoo escapes. So you run into the occasional lion or bear. Oh my. And of course, humans. Humans are always the worst, right? Venturing in New York. District listings. Rumors. Yeah. Oh, so the rumors. The Russians are invading New York. I heard it from a guy who trades with some harbor rats that they had run in with a Russian ship a couple weeks ago, and they spotted more since then down by the lower river, down by the lower bay. Some people say they've landed tanks over in Brooklyn. C. Rumor C. This rumor is heard only if the players have been asking about the gold. Speaking of gold, there's some gold up on the 34th Street. Yeah, God's truth. I've seen it right in front of the Empire State Building. There's these holes in the sidewalk like bomb craters. You look into them, sometimes there's a gold brick. They're all squished out of shape, just like someone dropped it from the top of the building, What? Have I ever been up there? Man, there's like 100 stories tall. I ain't nothing up there but old offices. Who wants to climb up high for a couple of bottles of copier toner? You'd have it be crazy to climb all the way up there. Man. Rumor F. This rumor will be heard only if players have been asking about trucks. Missing trucks from the gold convoy. There's an old truck like you're asking about on 34th Street somewhere. Yeah, 34th and 5th by the Empire State Building. Rumor K. Did you hear this leader of the co-op over in Governor Smith houses? His kid was taken in a raid by marauders. They say that they're holding her until he agrees to cut them in on the food they got stored up. Only that they had a real bad harvest and the food's almost gone already. Some say they took her across the Brooklyn Bridge. Others say they're down in the sewers somewhere. If you ask me, the poor kid's a goner. Rumor Q. The story's all over. This story's all over town. There's a bunch of jerks from the government here in Manhattan. They're trying to get things up and running again, and like the old days, you know, hot and cold running sewage and all that. No, not the Milgov, the civilian government. Can you imagine having to pay taxes to the U.S. of A again? Yeah. There you go. So there's a lot of rumors in this particular one. Far North Manhattan, special sites in Far North Manhattan, in Harlem. Counter results. Special sites in Harlem, East Harlem. Manhattan, the mayor's territory. Nice big map of the city. Riverside Park. Here, Central Park is now a fortress in its own right. The rubbles from hundreds of fire-ruined, demolished buildings were carried from the surrounding neighborhood shortly after the rude riots, and a wall 10 feet high in most places, topped by broken glass and barbed wire, was erected all the way around the park's perimeter. Lumber and sheet metal watchtowers have been built at intervals inside the walls. These are manned night and day by the mayor's troops, and many of these are replacements for M60 machine guns. The gates, one at the Museum of National History and the other at the park's northwest corner, are movable lumber and barbed wire affairs, which are closed at night and always guarded. Cars and trucks converted to alcohol and carrying armed men patrol the walls both inside and outside at all times, and roving patrols are frequent. Central Park is a cornerstone of the mayor's power, proposes enough food to feed over a third of its people, and supplying wood, water, and other vital materials. Food supplies are stretched further by feeding the park's workforce barely enough to keep them alive. Prisoners captured during attacks on the mayor's territory and raids on other neighborhoods are frequently starved and worked to death. Mayor's pragmatic approach to prisoners. So far as the workers are concerned, Central Park and the row houses and tenements to the west are only one vast slave labor camp. The largest building inside the park wall is the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The museum's directors removed most of the paintings before the bombs fell, transferring them to underground vaults on Long Island before the nuclear exchange began. The mayor's troops used the Rockefeller Wing to store food during the winter, and the Great Hall in the library is headquarters for operations. Just as a little bit of a taste. No more information on the mayor's layout and holdings, his resources. Lower East Side, downtown Manhattan, and the Duke's Realm. The Duke's Realm, which is referred by the locals as Manhattan, New York, or rarely the Kingdom of New York, is actually a large number of relatively isolated communities scattered across South Manhattan. This is because large areas of the district are uninhabitable or controlled by vicious marauder groups, and some buildings are easier to fortify than others. Duke's most serious problem is food. Starvation is the specter that faces all the city's inhabitants. Especially severe for the Duke, has an estimated 18,000 people under its control, but only relatively tiny bits of farmland at Battery Park and City Hall to cultivate. A massive program to clear city lots in Lower Broadway and abandoned portions of the Tribeca has produced impressive gains, but thousands in South Manhattan are suffering from malnutrition. A massive program to demolish buildings and clear lots for planting next year are underway throughout the district. The Duke is open lanes to trade with several other communities in Manhattan, notably the Lower East Side and Midtown Manhattan. Also quick raids against various enemies, the largest the mayor up in Central Park. This shows you how old this is. Special sites in downtown Manhattan includes the World Trade Center. Paula, escape from New York. The Bronx, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens. Other aspects of New York City. So on and so forth. The underground, the tunnels, the organizations of people. Mayor's government, the Duke's government. Harbor rats, other harbor rats. Not enough to have the harbor rats, we have some others as well. NPCs, the Hudson Vikings, the Easters, key NPCs, And we got the mayor, the Duke, Old Tuck, Quick Sam, Carol Wells, Zach, all that glitters. And this is basically the subsection for the primary goal of the adventure, so to speak, is getting their hands on that gold and what you do with it when you get it. You know, you turn that gold. You know, it talks about what happened, why it ended up the way it did, and then, of course, it leaves. Here's something interesting because it says, the gold must still be on the Manhattan someplace. It would have taken 24 trucks to move it all, but who has it or where it went for all that purpose, he has no idea. The guy says, yeah, we know where it is. It's the bottom of that reservoir. So you've got 24 trucks worth of gold bars bullion there. What will you do if you get that? Will you rule New York City? That's the question for another time.